Grace and peace, Big East family. I am Pastor Wallace C. Baxter III. I am the president of the Congress of Christian Education for the Eastern region, and I'm excited to welcome you to this 58th annual session of the Big East. I am grateful to President Akeem Royale and his entire cabinet, and I'm excited about what God will do this week. I believe that God has a word for each and every one of us. Through the songs, through the prayers, through the sessions, through the preaching, God is going to speak to us. Why? Because when we need a word, that's when God gives us a word. And so I'm grateful for what we'll experience this week. So I'm grateful to be in this space with you virtually. I wish I could see you physically, but until we meet again in person, this will do. We thank God for you, and I love you.
Good afternoon, grace and peace. I am Pastor Wallace C. Baxter III, the president of the Congress of Christian Education for the Big East, the Eastern region of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. We certainly give honor to our president, Reverend Akeem Royale, and the entire cabinet and all that we are doing this week. It's an exciting time in the midst of all that we're going through with the pandemic and other things. We know that our God is still on the throne. And we know in particular that God is on the side of all of us who are, quote unquote, the oppressed. All of us who have been kissed rather with the Son. All of us who are God's children and happen to be minorities in this nation called America. And with all that's going on economically, socially, politically, and in our churches, worship, it's different than it has ever been before. We pause and we come together in this special session presented by the Congress of Christian Education, in which we aim to talk about mental health, during this pandemic and what it will look like as we go beyond this pandemic, but also what it looks like in the church, and how our people are faring. And we have two, who I believe are two amazing panelists today, two amazing panelists. We have Pastor Oscar Brody. Oscar Brody is the pastor of the Carmody Hills Baptist Church here in Maryland, and he is an amazing pastor, leader within the state, and has done some pretty transformational things over there at Carmody Hills. And so we'll hear from him a little bit more about some of the things that he's doing at his church. And then we have Dr. Andre Ivy, who is the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Marshall Heights in Washington, D.C. Pastor Ivy is no stranger to those in the Big East, particularly those who have been attending these sessions that we've been hosting during this pandemic, because he is not only a pastor, but he is also what I call a clinician. He is one that also knows mental health, knows what it means when it comes to taking care of ourselves from a clinical aspect. He has the training, he has the academic training and the professional training to do just that. And so I think this is a unique sort of combination to look at these issues with these two individuals. And so we're excited to get this conversation started. And I really just kind of want to start off with both of you kind of asking this one question. How do you see mental health issues manifesting during this pandemic?
Well, if I may, I don't know if you want me to go first or Dr. Ivy. Again, I know that we are certainly in a pandemic, in terms of how the great question of how these issues are manifesting in the pandemic. But the reality is we had issues before we got into the pandemic. I believe that these issues that has already pre-existed, the pandemic would just be adding more on top of that. So, for example, I can believe that we'll probably see a major increase in anxieties and some type of different type of phobias. If I could just term this hugophobia. Some folk may still be afraid to be able to hug and do all of that sort of things. But I believe that anxieties, and particularly, I think that we're experiencing some major separation anxieties based upon us not being able to be together from March up until this present time.
To add on to what Pastor Brody said, I think he makes a good point. I think that even prior to the pandemic, we had a lot of issues within our churches and our communities around the issue of mental health. I think what has happened during the pandemic is that maybe we've seen now an uptick in some of your anxiety disorders and your depressive disorders. A lot of these things were never even talked about. They were never brought to the table. Now that we've had, for some of us, have had to live in isolation, had to keep our distance from people, that it has become a challenge. And whether we know it or not, or whether we believe it or not, for many of our parishioners, for many of the people who worship with us on Sundays, that is not just a time of worship, but that's also a time of fellowship. And for those of us who pastor members who are older or seniors, I think isolation has become a greater issue during this pandemic. Not being able to get out on Sunday, and it's what Pastor Brody alluded to earlier, not being able to hug and physically health has always been a concern. But I would say I think there's been an uptick in cases that have not been identified and some that have been identified. And then I think once the pandemic comes to a close, we're going to have to figure out how we navigate life after the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that's real. That we're here and we have to figure out that hugophobia. Have to figure out what that looks like. Coming back together. What does together look like? What does it entail? I think those are pivotal questions. Now, it cannot go unspoken that on top of these mental health challenges, opportunities, what have you, that I agree, were present long before this pandemic ever hit. There's like a magnifying glass over them now. But on top of that, we've seen this like resurgence, I'll call it, of racial tension. This resurgence of racism, if you want to call it that, which is really what it is. And we see it, play out on multiple levels. How do you think that the health pandemic coupled with this social pandemic, how has that been affecting us? How has that been affecting us as people, as children of God?
I think it's affected us greatly. We probably haven't talked about it enough. And I would say January 6th, what we now call the Capitol riot, I think that was just a culmination of a lot of issues of pain and foolishness. I'll just say that. That'll be good since I'm on here. Has come to live in the midst of racial tension at an all-time high. And I'm going to say an all-time high for my generation. I can't speak to the generations that have come before me. And I think now people just have no regard for other groups of people. And then I think with our outgoing president, that we just witnessed, what's the word I want to use? We witnessed a brazenness or a boldness about speaking or doing things that are just out of the norm. If the Capitol riots weren't enough, I don't know what is enough. And so people are having to live through a pandemic. They're having to live through political unrest, which I think at the end of the day, it causes grief. It causes turmoil. Or we've gone through what I like to call a collective grieving process because of all that has happened. So I think on top of the pandemic, racial tensions have not helped us. My hope is that now, because we have a new administration, now because we're moving past our past president, that we can begin the process of healing as we try to move forward.
Certainly, again, I believe it has been a major detriment, but I'm just reminded by triggers. All of us have different types of triggers, and whatever trigger that was sparked to allow these certain, again, as Dr. Alvey alludes to, this foolishness to break into our world. It just simply let us know that it has already been there, but it's just laying dormant. And I believe that the mental health has really kicked in overdrive as we're seeing now the blatant racism, broad daylight, folks not even care. We can just go back in the days of the South, our grandparents, and how our grandparents would tell us how they had to work on the farms and how they had to clean up for the whites, and how they was not even allowed to be able to come into the bathrooms after they had worked all day and having to go to the field and not being able to come and get some cool. And not only that, just to be able to be compensated with food with a cheese snabs that we call it as a cheese-it, and maybe a cold drink of water. And these disparities are still alarming with us today. But I think those triggers, if we will, just have triggered one race and then kicked over into our race, and they're beginning to see us as they did of old. But certainly it's a new day now. Mental health is real. They have mental health, and we have mental health. It's a challenge. So again, I just believe that triggers are really alerting our communities, whereas though that we are reminded by so many things of old or new, and now that we've come just frustrated and concerned about what is taking place in our communities, is causing us now to be trained in weaponry. I never seen so many people, black folks, training the right way in terms of come and get your gun license, come and secure your guns. Not only that, there's no need to have you can't even find bullets anywhere now. So the inside edition, if I want to call it, has always been there, serving on a different listserv, but we got the aftermath of the listserv after everything else is gone, which again triggers our mental psyche, which causes us to have anxiety, which causes us to begin to look at not only white folk differently, but to look at each other differently, because now there's more of a trust factor.
Correct.
And if I can jump right back in, I think what Pastor Brody is saying is so true. And if you even look at the distribution of COVID-19 vaccination, once again, we can go back and look at racism again and discrimination, the disproportionate number of African Americans who died as a result of the COVID-19 virus, and now are having to almost fight to get a vaccination in our communities. But then you can go to other communities where it is really simple and easy to get on a list and to get a vaccination. So I think this issue of racism is just brought to the forefront. First of all, we saw the number of African Americans dying from the virus. And now when it's time for the vaccination, it is almost like you have to go all over just to try to find a place to get the vaccination. So once again, racism plays into this. And then we have to be honest and we have to be clear that the powers that be are behind some of this. They decide which clinics and where the vaccinations are going to, and then how they're distributed to our communities. And so once again, inequity plays out. Once again, racism is a part of it. And it is sad as a country that we want to politicize not just a virus, but now we want to politicize who gets the vaccination as if one group is better than the other group. So racism is still alive and well in America. And I hope that we're making some headways to sort of change the narrative, because the narrative in this country is that those who've been blessed or darkened by the sun, we seem to be last, and those who are left out. And that's just a travesty when we're trying now to come out of the pandemic. We knew going into it there were going to be disparities, but I don't think many of us thought that when it came time to get the vaccination, we were going to have to deal with some of the same issues that we had to deal with going into the pandemic.
And if I could just kind of piggyback, that's certainly a great point, Dr. Ivy. As I look at this word that was introduced to us, that has always been in existence, but from a different perspective, and that word is social distancing. They have been social distancing from us a long time. And if we're not careful, that's another word and another form of racism. Because now we are learning to even distance ourselves the more. So now we're coming through using technology, which is great. We have always been a divide of the people because of what was infiltrated and what we were injected with, if you will, to look at each other differently as the same color, not to support each other as the same color. Of course, that is a social mental aspect that we're dealing with. But I think one of the ways, just to infuse another word by social distancing, and if I wasn't on this Zoom, I probably would use another word of choice. But what is that? Social distancing, when they have always distanced themselves from us. Again, going back to the shots, even trying to get a shot. I mean, if I can be honest, I already got one shot already. But again, to go in, and I don't call it a lie, I just tell them a good story, to be able to display or pose yourself as being a worker of a community just to save your life. When folk are coming from Montgomery County and different states and coming into our backyard, not of color, are able to walk in and you look at their ID based upon their age, if you will. They're not questioned at all. I saw it with my own eyes being registered. But when I went in as declared to be a man of God, a pastor, oh no, a pastor is not on the list, so you won't be able to get injected. I said, well, I am a mental health worker. Oh, come on in. Let me re-register you. You can go on in and get your shot. But watch this, the whole piece of, I think it's discrimination and racism by our own, if you will. Before I give you the shot, you have to prove to me that you are a mental health worker. Do you have any documentation? No, I don't, but I do have a website where you can go on my website and to see that I am the CEO of the Hope Center, and that's how I was able to get my shot.
Right.
So the social aspect of that.
Yeah, that's real. I mean, it reminds me of what Zora Neale Hurston said one time, that the Black woman is the mule of the world. It's as though in this season, Black people and minorities in general are the mules of the world. We do most of the work, and particularly it's ironic to me, and this is Women's History Month, and so I think it's important to note that a Black woman was at the forefront of getting this vaccine to where it is. I mean, she was the one in the lab doing the work, getting it, done the right way. And we have her to thank for it. Yet people that look like her are struggling to even acquire the vaccine that someone that looked like them discovered. And so it's amazing how this comes full circle. And as you both mentioned, it's racism is here to stay, it seems, is here, and it's not going anywhere. And we have to definitely, reconcile with all of that. And Pastor Brody, you kind of alluded to something that I think is important, and this whole idea of just taking care of yourself as a community worker, a community liaison, even a pastor who is among the people, even in this season of social distancing and all these things. The reality is, we still have to provide services, right? Even though the worship is by and large virtual and Bible studies are virtual, all this stuff, what have you. But at the same time, you still get calls about people being sick, still get calls about people dying, still have funerals to actually preside over the best way you can, whether it's virtually or in person. And so the question I really have for both of you is what do we do, or how can pastors, right, in this season, because I know there are many pastors that will be watching this, how can we as pastors practice self-care while administering pastoral care during this dual pandemic, during all this going on? How can we take care of ourselves at the same time? Go ahead, Pastor Brody.
Okay, certainly. Again, that's a great question. And as I remind about Matthew chapter number 14, verses 11 through 15, as it talks about how John the Baptist was beheaded and how the disciples went to bury him. And not only did they bury him, Jesus was not there. And how they had and went to Jesus and told Jesus that John the Baptist is now dead. He has been beheaded. And Jesus then went right into a direct depression, right? So, but what Jesus did, and watch this, you have to understand this context, because what Jesus did, Jesus took some time by himself, right? He went to a desolate place. And we know when we go to a desolate place, that's a dismal place. That's a dark place. That's a place where we don't want to be bothered. So there's three things that I see in there. Jesus had some face time. So he had to go to the Father to have some face time. Not only did he have some face time, but he had some knee time. So he got on his knees and asked his Father, what is going on? What is it that I've done so wrong that caused my man, my beloved, to be beheaded and die? And watch this. And then after all of that, he took some me time. And so watch this. I want you to not miss this, because what happened in the midst of him having his me time, after suffering through trauma, pain, depression, and anxiety, he still was able to manage his work, because he said he got on the boat, met the disciples, they went on and began to feed the 5,000, and they kept the ministry going while in the midst of pain. So the same thing that we have to do is painful, but we also have to be able to find a way that we can manage our own issues and our self-care by spending time with Jesus.
To add, I want to add to that, because there's nothing to add. He just hammered that one home. I want to go in a different direction with self-care. I think it's how we see self-care. I think self-care has to be a model for each individual pastor. And it can't be an add-on, can't be something extra. It needs to become something part of our daily makeup and our daily routine. We can't wait till we hit a wall. We can't wait till we're burned out. We can't wait till we're tired. Self-care has to become a daily practice for pastors and those whom we lead. I think the challenge is that we talk about self-care when we're tired and we're worn out, instead of putting it into our schedule each and every week. Jesus gets up early in the morning, and Mark 1 goes to a solitary place where he prays. He understands that if he's going to manage, as Pastor Brody says, the workload of ministry, he needs some private time with his Father. The challenge for many of us is that we've been conditioned to work without breaks, to work without vacations, and then to add this on, and then to brag about having a busy schedule. as if that's an honor, as if that's something to be cool about, telling people we get up early in the morning at 4 o'clock and we don't go to bed till midnight. That's nothing to brag about. That's a recipe for a heart attack. That's a recipe for a breakdown. That's a recipe for depression. That's a recipe for anxiety. We have to make self-care a priority. And until the preacher makes it a priority, it really makes it hard for our parishioners to make it, a priority for them. We've seen now during the pandemic that many of us probably are working harder and longer because we're at home. Even in the midst of a pandemic, we have to figure out a good rhythm and a good rest. We cannot work around the clock. We cannot have our phones in our hand all day. We have to figure out when it's time to rest, when it's time to shut down the computer, and when we just cannot handle any more phone calls. And I'll add this because we've been talking about it, and you started out, Dr. Baxter, talking about funerals and trying to provide care for our members in this season. It is utterly difficult for many of us to do graveside services, to do services in a funeral home. But the alternative, I would prefer that we do it the way that we're doing. My prayer is that as pastors in this season, we're learning that we're not supermen, nor are we super women. We have to take breaks and do good self-care. And when we do good self-care, we practice it in front of our congregations, and then they practice it also.
I agree. I definitely know for a fact that at the start of this pandemic, and I believe all of us are probably in this boat, that at the start of this pandemic, we didn't do a good job of self-care as pastors. And I believe most pastors didn't, and partly for just cause, because we literally had to turn on a dime in order to still facilitate worship and Bible studies and things like that, as best we could while we were trying to figure out what this was all about. But thankfully, as time went on, I was able to find that rest, right, in the midst of that rhythm, and basically redefine the rhythm so that now, I have what is becoming a good rhythm and rest pattern, and I think it's always evolving because, needs change, and then your own personal dynamics change and evolve. But I believe it's pivotal in this season. And, and on top of that, I think that it's also important that we as pastors are transparent with our people, right? That we are not, living in a fantasy land and trying to act like we're something that we're not. The reality is that we all get tired. We all struggle. We all feel the pain of this season. And it's just important for all of us to realize that and to be honest about it. Because I've learned that when you allow, as a leader, when you allow your people to see your transparency, right, they also become transparent and honest with themselves and each other, which just helps to foster, I think, a better overall community within the church. And so thank you both for that. And I believe that some pastor has been helped today by that. I want to kind of push a little bit more on the COVID side and particularly looking at what resources might be available, but more so even when it comes to mental health, right? And I'll push this towards Dr. Ivy first. What resources are available to pastors in particular and churches wanting to meet the mental health needs of their community, whether it be federal government resources or any local resources that you may know of that you could encourage pastors to look into that may help them in their context?
Well, I think first and foremost, and partnerships are so important. I think the church has worked in isolation too long. I think every community has partnerships that we can benefit from to provide services for its parishioners. Whether you're in Maryland, DC, or Virginia, there are partnerships with mental health agencies that can provide services to its membership. And so now I want to pivot, but I think when it comes to services for pastors, I think the dynamics change a little bit. And I say I think the dynamics change a little bit because many of us deal with a plethora and we carry heavy loads. And I'm unsure how many pastors are just willing to sit down with someone that they don't have some background or some knowledge of, and providing counseling or therapy to a pastor. And this is my own professional and personal opinion. It is so different than providing counseling and therapy to someone else because of all of the array of things that we have to wrestle with and we have to deal with. So it would be my suggestion that pastors who are seeking therapy is that they would seek out someone who has a background in Christian counseling, someone who understands not just the Bible, but they understand psychology, they understand mental health. And I think one of the challenges is that many pastors, they have sought out counseling in the past, but maybe they've had a bad experience with a counselor or a therapist because sometimes the counselor or therapist is so enamored that they're sitting with a faith leader that they can't provide the type of services that they really need for the faith leader. So I think the challenge is finding someone that works for you and understands your needs and your desires for treatment. So many pastors carry burdens that they never share with anyone. And so sitting down in front of a therapist or a counselor, it can be a frightening situation if you've never been in that environment. So I would suggest for pastors to seek out persons who have clinical background, but they have a background in Christian counseling, and the person that they're working with, and I think this is important, the person that they're working with understands the dynamics of church. Because this is a different animal. This is not just an issue you're having with on your job, but they understand the dynamics of church, and then they understand the dynamics of being a pastor. And when we put all those pieces together, I think that makes for a great relationship between the counselee and the counselor.
That makes sense. So, Pastor Brody, what is your take on this in particular? I'm excited about this because I know that you have even established a mechanism with your church. You know, Pastor Ivy talks about partnerships, right? And so, what kind of partnerships have you engaged in? What kind of mental health partnerships have you engaged in as a faith leader?
Certainly, one of my partners are on the phone, the person of Dr. Andre Ivy. Dr. Andre Ivy has come and did a phenomenal job in so many workshops that we had. Dr. Ivy was one of our first facilitators as we developed a group just for pastors, if you will, and preachers called the Wounded Shepherd. And he's absolutely right. Many did not show, but those who did show was blessed by that. But particularly the resources are great. Again, not only serving as a pastor, but I am the founder and the CEO of Hope Center, Holistic Opportunities Propelling Everyone, where we have coined a term called bibliopsychoeducation, and that is where we are able to connect the dots from the pulpit to the pew, from the pew to the pastor study, from the pastor studies to the clinician office. And I believe in the Holy Ghost. I believe that God can do the impossible. But certainly I believe that there are clinicians that God has blessed us with to be able to help of those who are in need. Not only that, we are partnered with surrounding churches. We're in the process of taking our model to various different churches. Right now, we're working with an additional church in DC, Zion Baptist Church, Pastor Keith Bird. Also, we're working with Mount Ephraim Baptist Church, Dr. Joe Gilmore. We're in the process of opening up centers there. Also, we had the opportunity to open up a Montgomery County site under at Mount Jezreel under Pastor, I can't think of his name before now,
Jameson Hunter,
Spearman. Dr. Spearman, we were able to open up there. Certainly did a lot of training with his church, his staff. But again, we are open and always available to foster a relationship with any church that is are in need or trying to find a way how they can get a Hope Center at their church to meet the needs of their people. But again, it has been a tremendous blessing to our congregations because one of the things we do speak on, I said that every person in this church has some type of disability. Even one of us on this call have a disability. We may not know what our disability is, but we have a disability. So when we come into the church house, and again, once we get into the church house and you bring all of those various different abilities together, some disabilities you can see, some disabilities you can't see. Again, but sometimes there's a trigger in the church that causes mayhem, causes chaos. And what it does, it reverses us back to the trauma that we had. So what we put in place, we provide every second Sunday before the pandemic, we will do, again, a term called bibliopsychoeducation, where the clinician is connected with the preacher, and the clinician and the preacher work hand in hand. Say, for example, if we're preaching, the workshop is on the second Sunday, going to be self-care, then the preacher will alter his sermon to kind of line up to dealing with something biblically self-care. That has been helping us. That's worked. We had some folk with known and seen disability in the church that we were able to educate the congregation. For example, if someone in your church have a tic, just bust out laughing for no reason, and some people couldn't deal with that. So we were able to explain that. We was able to do workshops around that. So when individuals come into our church, let's say this, we are that imperfect church. We're not a mass church. We had to grow to do that. So when someone comes with a disability, guess what? We embrace not only them, but we embrace the disability, because we understand that all of us have a disability. But the reality is we're able to do something about it. We refer them, and we refer them right within the doors of our church. So we do have clinicians on staff that's ready and available to meet your needs. Certainly we are on insurance panels. We do that. Just a couple testimonies, and I can talk about this all day. We had a before care and after care program where we were seeing kids throughout the community, and we was doing some kind of art therapy. And one of the things, we had a training at the church. We train all of our workers that work with children. If you see this, if you see that, this might be a possibility. We need to know about it as soon as possible. We had a couple students, particularly one student was drawing pictures, and these pictures were pictures of cemeteries, pictures of family crying, so many other things. So that trained person, wasn't a clinician, was able to reach out to our director, Dr. Joanne Frederick, and they were able to meet the needs of that person. We were able to get the child into counseling, not in the family, but what happened, the kid was making suicidal ideations, and they was beginning to stop the suicide from happening. So there's many testimonies that has transpired from that. But again, we're certainly always open and available. Again, our phone number is, my personal cell phone is 301-455-4835. We'll come to you. You can come to us. We can Zoom, but we're excited about sharing our model. Also, we're in the process coming out with a pamphlet. Our pamphlet will be out soon. We have been doing a lot of writing pertaining to this. We'll be able to help the churches, but particularly help the pastor. Because one of the things that we have implemented, and we can just talk about this briefly, and I'm going to close, particularly when we have that newlywed that desires counseling. Again, I'm not a clinician. Dr. Ivy is a clinician. I can give you some what the biblical model says, what the Bible says about that. But the reality is they're two different people. And by them being two different people, they're going to have some clashes. They're going to have some disappointments. So one of our requirements are, if you will, not only do you come to see me, even if you don't want me to do the counseling, even if we're going to marry you at the church, whatever it may be, if you start with me, of course, I'm going to give you the biblical aspect, but also you have to go and get the clinical aspect up. So it goes hand in hand, because at the end of the day, we want to stretch the people to a point where as though they can make a decision on their own. Am I ready mentally to do this, or am I ready spiritually to do this? So that's just a tidbit of what we do.
That makes sense.
And if I can jump right in there, I think we have to embrace both models. I think the danger for the church is to assume that every person that comes through our doors, we're going to anoint them and we're going to pray over them and they're going to be healed in the name of Jesus. And I think that causes trauma even within the church itself, because we have instances, or all of us have witnessed instances on Sunday where we've had something that happened within the framework of our sanctuary that was not a concern from a spiritual standpoint, but this was more of a mental standpoint. So if we can embrace the two and say that we can couple them and work together, then we can get to a place where we can help those who come to our church. The challenge is that every person that comes to our churches, they should not end up in the pastor's office seeking treatment. Some people should never cry. And I hope I don't get in trouble. I don't think some people should cross the threshold of the pastor's office, because the issues that they are having may not be of a spiritual nature, but they may be of mental illness, where the pastor may not be prepared to handle those concerns in an office setting. So I think we have to learn that we can marry the two together. We marry science all the time. We don't question when we go to our doctor and they give us medicine for high blood pressure, diabetes. We don't have a question about it. But when it comes to mental health, we seem to sort of throw that issue aside. We have to learn to marry them together. And I think we can have greater synergy with our churches and with those that we partner with. There are some persons that I am just not skilled enough to work with. Now, I want to say this. I am a former clinician. And so there are some things that I just no longer do. I used to work on an inpatient psychiatric unit at a federal facility. During those seasons, they were cases that were very difficult to handle. I think the challenge for the church is being able to refer out and feeling comfortable that you're referring out, because this may be something that the pastor nor the leadership can handle.
Dr. Abbey, if I could say something, Dr. Baxter, on that, one of the beliefs that I have is just my belief. No one will have to agree. The reason that we have so many misdiagnosed people, because we have misdiagnosed practitioners. And that's from the pulpit to the pew, right? As Dr. Abbey talks about, we're trying to fix everything by anointing them with oil. But if our practitioners that stand up Sunday after Sunday don't believe in the power of science and mental health, guess what? We're misdiagnosing the people all the time, right? So our responsibility, in order for them to become healthy and not being misdiagnosed, we have to make sure that we are healthy, that we can be able to diagnose. And that comes from basic training. You can call it Dr. Abbey. I just need to know some small tips, some small things. You're going to be trying to diagnose everybody. But again, these are the things that I believe that we need to know. Because again, it's one thing to have a strong, thriving, and masked church. But at the end of the day, they've been misdiagnosed for many years. Woe unto us who scatter and harm the sheep.
Yeah, agreed.
I want to jump. Can I jump right back in, Dr. Bax? I think it's important also when we're gonna come out of this pandemic. And one of the things I've said earlier, and I think it's important, is this collective grief. And so when we return physically to our buildings, many of our parishioners are going to even grieve walking back into the building, because when they walk back into some of the buildings, some of the people that initially were with us will not be with us again. And what does that look like? Even I know for one of my members in particular, he lost his wife, and he made it clear to me that he would never sit on that side of the sanctuary again because of losing her. And so once we come back in our buildings, we're going to have to be aware of this collective grieving that's going to go. And I don't know for how long, but I think we have to be sensitive as church leaders how we help people deal with this grief. There are some persons that attend our churches on Sundays, and they love the fellowship, but the fellowship has not been there. Now you're going to return to a building, and people that you used to sit with on the same pew, used to usher with and sing in choirs, they're not going to be with us. So we're going to have to figure out a way to help as a community with this collective grieving.
And I agree. If I can just say one more thing, Dr. Ivor, you hit it. One of the things we are in the process of doing is gathering, because we did have some to die from COVID. Matter of fact, my sister was in the numbers, and we are working on a memorial service to collectively deal with all of those. Even if there was a family member, didn't really have to be a member of the church, to try to help bury that some of that pain, but also offer help to the rest of it.
Yeah, that's so vitally important. I mean, and the other piece is, that you have a different type of grieving that will be going on, where you may have members that were well enough to attend service before the pandemic, and they lived through the pandemic, but are unable to come back into that space. They're now they're unable to get back to church. And, that's one of the things I've spoken with some of our leaders about, particularly our diaconate, saying, hey, we're going to have to be prepared to minister to them in a unique way, because they may have cherished the fellowship, and now they're no longer able to make it through the doors of the church. Even when we get back into that space, there's going to be, I agree with you both wholeheartedly, there's going to be some collective grieving that we've got to be prepared to help deal with. I believe this is the season. This is the time to, remove all blinders that say that there's no place for mental health in the church. All of that has to go out the window, because we're going to have to help our people through all of this, and help ourselves through it at the same time, because it's a new season, it's new territory. And we've never come this way before, like this, right? And so it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting, and in a sense exciting at the same time for those of us who are actually, committed to the pastoral aspect of pastoral ministry, the pastoral care aspect, I'll say, where we have to, find ways to help meet people at their point of need, without overextending ourselves and without being something we are not. Because I think that's a word that both of you have said today, that there's been some malpractice even on our part, whether it's whether we know it or not. It to some degree, it could be ignorance. It could be that we just didn't know, but I think we've said it clear enough today that pastors know, when you hit that moment where your expertise is no longer there, it's time to shift and hand it off to the professionals. I say the same thing you say, Pastor Brody, when I go into premarital counseling sessions. I just did a session with a couple not long ago, and I told them, I said, look, all I'm trying to do is show you the biblical precedent for what you're getting into, the biblical models and all of that. And then I can talk from my own experience, but that's about it. Outside of that, between the Bible and my 3.5, almost 4 years of experience, that's what you're gonna get. But I'm not afraid to admit that, and then to point them in the direction of those who are professionals to say, look, there's no shame in it. There's no issue. It's not taboo, contrary to popular belief. God has allowed these professionals to be here for a reason. God's given them the expertise. God has created the science. If you believe that God is the creator of everything, then you best believe God has created the science to help you. And we've got to drill that home to our people, especially now. And especially with this vaccine rolling out, we've got our work to do as leaders in the community. And so, with that, I'll hand it to both of you for kind of some closing remarks, and then I'll close us out. So, Pastor Brody, we're certainly going to put the information for the Hope Center out there and on the in the chat rather for this discussion. But is there anything that you have that you want to just close out with?
Again, I want to start off by saying again, thank you for the opportunity to come and share on today. Certainly thank the President Aiken Royale for the vision, allowing you to execute in the gift that God has blessed you with. But again, I just want us to be encouraged. I want us to understand and know that mental health do matter, such as the Word of God do. And I just want us to, again, just continue to have some face time, some me time, and some me time with the Father. So again, I thank each and every one of you. Again, particularly Dr. Baxter, I thank you for this opportunity.
Bless you, Dr. Ivy.
Well, once again, thanks for the opportunity to share. Always a privilege to sit with you, Dr. Baxter, and then always a privilege to talk with my good friend, Pastor Brody, doing just a great work at Carmody Hills and with the Hope Center. Just thankful to both of you. I just sort of want to close by saying, take good care of yourself. I don't want to say self-care. I mean, you have to make it a priority. And when you make it a priority, then everything else will fall into line. When it's not a priority, everything will fall apart. And as pastors, we have to do a better job. I'll say it again. We have to model good self-care in front of our parishioners. We can't be at the church 52 Sundays out of the year. We have to take a break. And once we model that, I think our members will then see it. Once again, thanks for the privilege and for sharing.
And I think that it cannot be overstated that even in this virtual season, it's important for you as the pastor not to be there every single time the virtual doors of the church open. Every single time you have a worship experience, you still have to practice self-care, because there is no difference in sermon preparation for a virtual experience versus an in-person experience. The same amount of time and energy and effort goes into preparation that happens in person. So don't think that just because you're not going to and fro the same kind of way, that is less of a burden, less of a load. I agree wholeheartedly with that you still have to implement those moments of rest, of taking care of yourself, which is, I like that. Self-care is one thing, but just take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. Do what you need to do for your sanity, for your mental health, and for your family health. Even in this season, I think it's important to note that to keep your priorities together, especially to every pastor, those who are leading, be sure that you keep those central things the central thing. Don't think that because you're around your family more that you're spending quality time with your family. Make sure that you're actually spending quality time. Turn your computer, your phone, whatever off, and just spend that time. The weather's breaking, it's changing, so go for a walk. Go for a run, go for a bike ride. Just go and sit outside for a minute with your family. And then also take those moments by yourself, with God, you and God, that spiritual discipline of silence and of just being with God. You'd be amazed what God will share with you if you open up to listen to what God has to say. Sometimes we go to God with a lot of things, but sometimes God simply wants us to listen and sit before God. And so my prayer for all of us is that we will sit with God because God's trying to speak. I think all of this is happening because God is trying to say something to each and every one of us. And so trust God in this season. My favorite proverb, Proverb 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge God, and God will direct your path. That's a selfless act to trust. And so trust God and let God lead. We certainly thank you for joining this session. We thank you. I want to thank Dr. Andre Ivy. I want to thank Pastor Oscar Brody. You both have done what I believe is an amazing job. And I just believe that people have been helped today by your willingness to have this conversation, talking about mental health, but also just talking about what we're all dealing with in this season. And I believe that God is going to bless you both because of your commitment to the children of God and to the kingdom. And so we're grateful for your willingness. I want to thank again, President King Royale for his entrusting me to do this and facilitate this. I want to thank my cabinet within the Congress of Christian Education and all the work that they put in and the continued prayers of the Big East of this great convention. And we are certainly excited about what God has in store for this convention moving forward. And so we're going to close out this session, but we hope that you will support the remainder of all of the activities of the Eastern Region annual session this year. We're grateful for what God has done, and we're grateful for what God will do. And so trust God in this season. Take care of yourself. Continue to wash your hands. Continue to practice social distancing, continue to wear your mask, whether you've been vaccinated or not. Continue to do all those things that matter, because part of taking care of yourself is knowing how to take care of others. And so let's do unto others as we would have them do unto us in this season. We thank God for each and every one of you who have tuned in today. And we just say, God bless you, God keep you, may heaven smile upon you is our prayer. God bless. Have a great rest of this week. God bless you.